My name is Stella. I am 32 years old, and today I stood inside the Pentagon to receive the Silver Star. Instead of celebrating, my father called to inform me that my entire family was boycotting the ceremony because I refused to bankrupt myself for my sister. I simply hung up, gave his front row VIP seat to the aunt they had all discarded, and walked out to the stage. When an aerospace billionaire hijacked the live broadcast to hand my guest a life-changing fortune, my phone suddenly flooded with 79 frantic missed calls from my parents. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. The VIP holding room inside the Pentagon was a cavernous space built of polished white marble and heavy mahogany wood. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady note, chilling the sweat on the back of my neck. I stood rigidly in my formal army dress uniform, the heavy fabric pressing against my skin. Every polished brass button and perfectly aligned ribbon on my chest represented years of survival, but the physical toll was impossible to hide. I shifted my weight slightly to the left, trying to ease the sharp throbbing pain radiating down my right thigh. The shrapnel wound from my last medevac deployment in a hostile combat zone never truly stopped hurting. It was a permanent limp, a daily reminder of the burning helicopter and the sand soaked in blood. I stared at the grand double doors leading out to the main auditorium, knowing that in less than 30 minutes, a four-star general would pin one of the military's highest honors onto my jacket. But as I took a deep, centering breath, my cell phone began to vibrate violently against my hip. I pulled the device from my pocket and stared at the glowing screen. The caller ID displayed a picture of my father, Victor. I was 62 years old, a former real estate broker who still dressed in tailored suits he could barely afford just to keep up appearances at his country club. Against my better judgment, I tapped the green button and lifted the phone to my ear, foolishly hoping for a brief moment of parental pride. "Hello, Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. "Are you and Mom close to the security checkpoint? The usher needs to escort you to the front row." There was no background noise of a busy highway or a crowded security line. Instead, I heard the distinct clinking of fine crystal and the soft jazz music that my parents always played in their suburban dining room. "We are not coming to your little parade." Stella, his voice cracked like a whip through the speaker, harsh and completely devoid of warmth. "You can stand up there all by yourself." The words hit me like a physical strike to the chest, but I maintained my military bearing. "You are not coming." I repeated, my tone dropping an octave. "I sent you the security clearance forms 3 months ago. The Department of Defense arranged a private car for you." "We canceled the car an hour ago," Victor snapped, his breathing heavy with indignation. "Do not play dumb with me, Stella. You know exactly why we are not there. We will never stand next to you. You are the absolute disgrace of this family." I closed my eyes, a bitter smile forming on my lips. It always came back to this. "You are boycotting my Silver Star ceremony because of yesterday," I said, making sure to articulate every word. "Because I refused to empty my bank accounts for you. You did not just refuse, you humiliated us." Victor shouted, his voice echoing out of the phone speaker so loudly that the military guard standing by the door glanced over in concern. All Caroline asked for was a simple signature. Victor continued, his rage escalating. "She needed you to sign for a $200,000 loan to save her fashion brand. It was a tiny favor to help your own sister keep her company afloat, and you looked her in the eye and said no." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "A $200,000 loan is not a tiny favor, Dad," I replied coldly. "My credit is spotless because I earned it. I am not risking my financial stability for a business that has never turned a profit." "How dare you talk about financial stability?" he hissed. 8 years ago, you chose to roll around in the mud with the military instead of giving your college fund to your sister. We told you Caroline needed that money to start her influencer career, but you were too selfish to hand it over." I felt the old anger flaring up, hot and familiar. "You did not ask me to hand it over," I reminded him, my voice turning into a low growl. "You and Mom drained my entire savings account without telling me. You stole the money I earned working double shifts in high school, so Caroline could buy designer handbags." I had to enlist in the army and fly medevac helicopters into active combat zones just to earn the GI Bill so I could get a degree. You had to serve your country, Victor mocked, entirely dismissing the reality of my trauma. Millions of people do it, Stella. Do not act like you are some kind of martyr because you chose a filthy, dangerous job. Caroline is building an empire. She has an image to maintain. She represents the true elegance of this family, while you walk around with a limp wearing combat boots. I leaned against the cool marble wall, staring up at the ornate ceiling of the Pentagon. I had spent 8 years flying into active gunfire to pull bleeding soldiers out of the wreckage. I had watched friends die. I had my own leg torn open by flying shrapnel, enduring months of agonizing physical therapy just to walk again. And yet to my father, I was nothing more than a stubborn obstacle who refused to fund his favorite daughter's delusions of grandeur. "You are a terrible daughter," Victor said, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. "We thought maybe you had learned some discipline in the military," Victor pressed on. "We thought you would finally understand the importance of loyalty and hierarchy. But you are just as stubborn and ungrateful as the day we kicked you out of the house." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Loyalty goes both ways, Dad. You want me to be loyal to a sister who has never worked a hard day in her life. You want me to risk everything I have built just to maintain the illusion that you are all wealthy. That is not loyalty. That is extortion." The line went silent for a brief second, save for the heavy breathing on his end. "You listen to me very carefully," he finally snarled. "You will not have a family after today." When the cameras pan to the VIP section, the entire country will see empty seats. Everyone will know that your own flesh and blood could not stomach the sight of you. We are going to enjoy our champagne brunch, and we are going to celebrate Caroline. You can take your little piece of scrap metal and choke on it. Victor spat out his final insult with venomous precision. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. The years of combat training had taught me how to detach from pain when survival was on the line. "Have a wonderful brunch, Dad," I said calmly. "Enjoy the television broadcast." I pressed the red button to end the call, cutting off whatever insult he was preparing to hurl next. The sudden silence in the grand holding room was deafening. I looked down at my perfectly polished shoes, the throbbing in my leg temporarily forgotten. My own father had chosen to punish me on the proudest day of my existence simply because I refused to be their financial victim any longer. But he was wrong about one thing. My VIP seats were not going to be empty. I slipped the phone back into my uniform pocket and smoothed the fabric of my jacket. I had survived enemy fire, burning wreckage, and the threat of death. I will survive the rejection of a man who valued appearances more than his child. A military usher approached, offering a polite, crisp nod. "5 minutes until we begin, ma'am," he announced respectfully, checking his clipboard. I nodded back at him, a genuine, hard-earned smile finally reaching my tired eyes. "I am completely ready for this," I replied smoothly. "Let the cameras roll across the country. I will definitely not be broken today." But before I could follow the usher toward those heavy doors, my phone vibrated with aggressive persistence. Victor could never stomach anyone having the final word. He had called back immediately, ensuring his entire room could participate in my punishment. I pressed the phone to my ear. Instead of my father's booming rage, a syrupy, high-pitched voice flooded the receiver. It was my younger sister, Caroline. "Stella, honestly, you are being so dramatic," she sighed, her tone dripping with practiced condescension. I could hear the clinking of champagne flutes in the background, the muted chatter of the high society crowd she had gathered for her vanity project. "Did you really hang up on Dad? His blood pressure cannot handle your tantrums." "I hung up because I have a ceremony to attend, Caroline," I replied. "The Pentagon does not delay broadcasts because you need to throw a tantrum over a loan." Caroline let out a theatrical laugh. "A loan that you ruined. I am standing in the middle of a ballroom hosting the launch party for my new luxury fashion line. The caterers were late and my investors are breathing down my neck. But instead of supporting my brand, you are making this entire weekend about your little piece of scrap metal." "That little piece of scrap metal is a silver star," I corrected her. "It is a military decoration for valor in combat. I bled for it." "And we are thrilled you found a hobby that suits your rough edges," she shot back smoothly. But some of us are building actual empires. I needed that $200,000 signature to secure manufacturing lines. Co-signing for me was the least you could do after abandoning the family to play soldier. Her delusion was staggering. Caroline was 30 years old, yet she operated under the assumption that the universe owed her funding. Her luxury fashion brand was nothing more than a poorly disguised money pit, a desperate attempt to manufacture prestige using overpriced marketing. Our parents had handed her everything, stripping my college accounts bare, to buy her a sports car on her 18th birthday, effectively forcing me into military service to afford an education. Now, she spoke to me as if my survival in a war zone was an inconvenience to her party. "You are not getting my signature, Caroline," I stated firmly. Before Caroline could launch into another rehearsed tirade, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the background noise on their end. It was Jamal, Caroline's husband. Jamal was a 34-year-old trauma surgeon, a brilliant black African-American man who had built his career entirely on his own merit. He was a man of profound integrity, dedicating 80 hours a week to saving lives in the emergency room. Unlike my blood relatives, Jamal understood duty and sacrifice. He also had absolutely no idea how toxic the family he married into truly was. They kept him isolated from their financial realities, using his prestigious title as a shield of respectability. "Caroline, give me the phone," Jamal said, his voice laced with confusion. "Victor, what is going on? Why is Stella on speakerphone right now?" "It is nothing, darling," Caroline cooed, her tone shifting to sweet. "My sister is just having one of her episodes. She is refusing to help with the business and being incredibly rude to Dad." "That is not what I heard," Jamal countered, stepping closer to the phone. "I just heard you minimize her silver star. Do you have any idea what that medal means? It is one of the highest honors in the United States Armed Forces. We promised Stella we would be there today. I rearranged my entire surgical schedule for this weekend. I traded shifts with 3 different doctors so we could stand in that audience and support her." "Jamal, please, you do not understand the logistics," Victor interjected. "Stella is being unreasonable. We cannot just abandon Caroline's launch party. This is a silver star." Jamal protested, his voice rising with righteous indignation. "You do not skip a silver star ceremony for a clothing launch." Stella risked her life. She was severely wounded, saving other Americans. "I am calling a private car to the Pentagon right now. Caroline, grab your coat." "We absolutely are not leaving." Caroline snapped, the sweet facade crumbling instantly. "My investors are here, Jamal. My entire future is riding on this afternoon. You are my husband, and you are going to stay right here and support my brand." "Your brand can survive without us for 2 hours," Jamal argued back. "Stella is your sister. She is sitting in Washington, D.C. all alone. I am not going to let her stand on that stage without family." For a brief, fleeting second, the warmth of Jamal's defense washed over me. It was the first time in my entire life that anyone connected to my family had actively fought for my honor. He was a good man, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife's business was a financial black hole and that her parents were bleeding him dry behind his back. Before Jamal could order the car, a sharp, terrifyingly familiar sound pierced the audio. The phone was snatched forcefully from Caroline's hand. I heard the sharp rustle of fabric, followed by the icy, razor-thin voice of my mother, Beatrice. She was 59 years old, a woman whose entire existence revolved around maintaining an illusion of wealth and superiority. Beatrice was the true architect of my family's dysfunction, a master manipulator who viewed everyone around her as stepping stones or obstacles. "Jamal, you will do no such thing!" Beatrice commanded, her words slicing through the air like a scalpel. "You are an intelligent surgeon, but you clearly do not understand how family business operates in our world." "Beatrice, with all due respect," Jamal started, his tone respectful but firm. "I said no," Beatrice snapped, cutting him off with vicious authority. "You married into this family, Jamal, which means you abide by our priorities. Caroline is building a legacy today. Stella is simply collecting a trinket for doing a job she chose to do. We do not reward betrayal. Stella had the opportunity to prove her loyalty to us yesterday, and she chose her own selfish bank accounts over her sister's survival." I listened to my mother verbally, annihilate my brother-in-law, asserting her dominance with ruthless precision. I knew exactly how Beatrice operated. She would use Jamal's polite nature against him, twisting his sense of respect for his elders to keep him in line. She would gaslight him into believing that I was the aggressor, the unstable veteran who deliberately chose to cause drama on Caroline's special day. Mom, I spoke up, my voice steady, cutting through her tirade. Do not speak to Jamal that way. He is the only person in that room with an ounce of actual honor. Do not you dare lecture me about honor, you ungrateful wretch, Beatrice hissed directly into the microphone. The ambient noise of the party had faded into the background. She must have walked into a private room to deliver her final blow without witnesses. You think putting on a uniform makes you superior to us. You think this ceremony makes you special. You are nothing, Stella. You have always been nothing but a stubborn burden. We gave you everything, and you repay us by refusing to sign a simple piece of paper. I am not signing away my credit to fund a delusion, I replied, and I am not going to apologize for surviving. Then you will survive completely alone, Beatrice stated, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. There was no rage left in her tone, only a chilling, calculated finality. It was the voice she used when she completely erased someone from her existence. You want to play the independent hero, fine. But know this. When you walk out onto that stage today, you will look out into the crowd and see exactly what you are worth to us. Nothing. Do not ever call this number again. Do not ever reach out to Caroline or your father. And do not ever expect us to act like your family again. The line went dead with a sharp electronic click. The call had ended, leaving me standing in the profound silence of the Pentagon holding room. The heavy marble walls seemed to press inward, but my breathing remained perfectly even. The ultimate betrayal had just been finalized. My mother had officially discarded me, choosing to protect a fraudulent fashion brand over the daughter who had bled for her country. They had silenced the only ally I had in that room, manipulating Jamal into submission, and they had banished me with a casual cruelty that would have broken a weaker woman. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. I did not shed a single tear. My military training, combined with decades of emotional survival, had turned my heart into a fortress. Let them have their cheap champagne and their fake luxury. Let them bask in the delusion of their own superiority. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. I slipped the device into my pocket and turned away from the wall. My posture straightened, my shoulders pulling back as the familiar weight of duty settled over me. The pain in my shrapnel-scarred leg was still there, a constant companion, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a testament to my endurance. I had survived enemy fire, and I would certainly survive the pathetic cruelty of Victor, Beatrice, and Caroline. I took a deep breath, preparing to face the cameras and the crowd, absolutely determined to show the world that I did not need their presence to stand tall. My focus sharpened on the massive wooden doors ahead, my spirit unbroken, my path entirely clear. For the first time in my life, I truly understood that walking alone was far better than walking beside people who only wished to drag me down. My moment of pure justice had finally arrived today. I lowered my phone, the dead screen reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights of the VIP holding room. The silence that followed Beatrice's vicious threat was absolute, yet it rang in my ears louder than any mortar shell I had ever encountered overseas. A civilian might have crumbled right then and there. A daughter who still harbored the foolish, childlike fantasy of parental love might have sunk to the polished marble floor and wept until her lungs gave out. But I was not just a daughter anymore. I was a combat veteran, a medevac pilot who had learned to compartmentalize catastrophic trauma while flying a Black Hawk through a barrage of enemy tracer fire. I stood perfectly still, my breathing strictly regulated to a 4-count rhythm. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. My family had always been the ultimate interrogators, constantly searching for my weak points, probing for vulnerabilities they could exploit to elevate Caroline. They wanted a reaction. They thrived on my desperation. I refused to give them a single drop of it. I smoothed the lapels of my dark green dress jacket, ensuring every ribbon and medal sat perfectly flush against the fabric. My shrapnel-damaged leg throbbed a sharp, biting ache that shot from my thigh down to my combat boots. but I welcomed the physical pain. Victor and Beatrice could steal my savings. They could organize a lavish fashion launch for a fraudulent company specifically to overshadow my military honors. But they could never steal the ironclad resilience I had built in their absence. This building, the Pentagon, was a monument to sacrifice and duty. The generals and dignitaries waiting on the other side of those mahogany doors understood the gravity of putting one's life on the line for others. My family only understood the gravity of maintaining their country club memberships and securing VIP tables at upscale Washington restaurants. The contrast was almost comical. I let out a slow, measured breath, completely severing the last invisible thread of obligation that tied me to the people who shared my DNA. I was finally free. I turned my head away from the ornate mirror and looked toward the far corner of the expansive holding room. Seated on a plush leather sofa, looking incredibly small and entirely out of place, was Aunt Josephine. She was 55 years old, my father's estranged younger sister, and the absolute black sheep of his pretentious social circle. While Victor and Beatrice draped themselves in designer labels and leased luxury vehicles to project an image of immense wealth, Josephine wore a simple, faded navy blue dress. It was something she had likely purchased from a discount rack a decade ago, though she had meticulously ironed every pleat for today's occasion. Her graying hair was pulled back into a neat, practical bun, and her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white with anxiety. She had witnessed my end of the phone call, her kind, tired eyes watching me with a mixture of deep sorrow and profound understanding. Josephine knew exactly how vicious her brother could be. When Victor had kicked me out of the house at 18 because I confronted him about draining my college fund for Caroline's vanity projects, he had explicitly forbidden any relative from taking me in. He wanted me homeless, broken, and desperate enough to return on my knees. Josephine was the only one who defied him. She drove her battered sedan to the gas station parking lot where I was sitting with a single duffel bag, loaded me into the passenger seat, and let me sleep on her lumpy, spring-filled sofa for 3 months until I could enlist in the army. Even after I deployed, when the rest of my blood relatives acted as though I had died, Josephine kept me tethered to humanity. During my hardest rotation at Bagram Airfield, when the rocket attacks were relentless and the casualty counts kept rising, the mail call would occasionally bring a battered cardboard box. Inside, carefully wrapped in layers of newspaper, would be homemade oatmeal cookies, thick wool socks, and handwritten letters detailing mundane, beautiful things like her community garden or a stray cat she had adopted. I walked across the polished marble floor, my combat boots echoing loudly in the cavernous room. Josephine stood up quickly as I approached, her hands fluttering nervously as she tried to smooth the wrinkles from her cheap dress. She looked terrified, expecting me to crumble into pieces after the brutal rejection I had just endured on speakerphone. "Stella, honey," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "I am so incredibly sorry. I know Victor and Beatrice can be harsh. Maybe they just got caught up in the stress of Caroline's party. You know how your father gets when he is worried about public appearances. Maybe if we call them back and apologize for the misunderstanding, they might still make it before the general speaks." Yet she still tried to find the good in him. I reached out and gently grasped her trembling hands, stopping her frantic movements. Her skin was rough and calloused from years of hard, honest labor, a stark contrast to my mother's perfectly manicured, lotion-softened hands. "We are not calling them back, Aunt Josephine," I said, my voice projecting a calm, unwavering authority. There was no misunderstanding. Victor made his choice. Beatrice made her choice. They decided that a fraudulent fashion launch is more important than my life and my service. I am not going to beg people to love me, not anymore. Josephine looked up at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "But it is your Silver Star ceremony, Stella. You are a hero, a real hero. You should have your family sitting in the front row cheering for you. You should have a father bursting with pride when they pin that medal on your chest. It is not fair that you have to walk out there alone." "I am not alone," I corrected her, squeezing her hands firmly. The realization settled over me, bright and undeniable. For 32 years, I had chased the phantom of a loving family, desperate to earn a seat at a table that was inherently rigged against me. I had achieved the highest grades, pushed my body to the absolute limit in military training, and risked my own life pulling bleeding soldiers from the wreckage of a burning helicopter. None of it had been enough for Victor and Beatrice. I released her hands and took a step back, looking down at my uniform. Pinned precisely above my left breast pocket, right next to my rows of service ribbons, was a heavy gold-embossed badge provided by the Department of Defense. The engraved metal read, "Guest of Honor Father." It was a badge of immense prestige, a badge Victor had eagerly demanded 3 months ago, when he thought my ceremony could be used as a networking opportunity for his failing real estate business. He had only abandoned the idea when I refused to become a guarantor for his shady financial schemes. I reached up and unclasped the backing of the badge. The thick metal felt cold against my fingertips as I pulled it away from my uniform fabric. Josephine watched me with wide, confused eyes. "Stella, what are you doing?" she whispered. "You have to wear your ceremonial markers." The protocol officers were very strict about the dress code. I ignored her protest. I stepped closer, entirely disregarding military protocol and the strict aesthetics of the Pentagon brass. I reached out and carefully positioned the gleaming gold badge over the left side of Josephine's faded navy blue dress. I pushed the sharp pin through the cheap cotton fabric and secured the clasp tightly against her heart. The heavy gold metal looked entirely out of place on her thrift store outfit, but to me, it was the most perfect, beautiful sight in the world. Josephine gasped, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. "Stella, no, I cannot wear this. This says father. This is for the VIP row. I am just supposed to sit in the back with the general admission crowd. I do not belong in the front row with the generals and the politicians. I am nobody." I looked her dead in the eye, channeling every ounce of authority I had earned as a flight commander. "You are not nobody, Aunt Josephine. You are the only person who actually acted like a parent to me." I smoothed out the fabric around the badge, making sure the gold lettering caught the harsh light of the holding room perfectly. "It is time you get what you actually deserve," I told her, my voice ringing with absolute finality. Before Josephine could offer another tearful protest, the heavy mahogany doors at the far end of the room swung open with a resounding click. The military usher stepped inside briskly. We marched forward together. The heavy mahogany doors swung fully open and revealed a breathtaking expanse of military grandeur. The Pentagon auditorium was a sea of pristine uniforms, polished brass, and the low, respectful murmur of high-ranking officials. Flashing camera lenses caught the ambient light and cast sharp reflections across the massive room. National news networks had set up their heavy broadcasting equipment along the perimeter. Their red recording lights blinked steadily, like warning beacons in the dim auditorium. I stepped onto the plush red carpet, and the thick fabric dampened the heavy thud of my combat boots. The pain in my right thigh flared instantly. It was a sharp reminder of the shrapnel embedded near my bone. My limp was pronounced today, aggravated by the hours of standing and the sheer tension radiating through my muscles. Yet I kept my chin perfectly level and my eyes fixed straight ahead. Next to me, Aunt Josephine walked with hesitant, jerky steps. Her faded navy blue dress stood out starkly against the backdrop of tailored military dress blues and expensive designer suits worn by the civilian politicians. She kept her head bowed, her hands clutching the small worn handbag she had carried for the better part of a decade. The gold guest of honor badge I had pinned to her chest caught the flashing lights of the press cameras. I could see her actively trying to shrink away from the overwhelming attention. I reached out and gently placed my hand on the small of her back. I applied a firm, steady pressure to guide her forward. I was not going to let her hide in the shadows any longer. We were assigned seats in the very front row, right next to the podium where the four-star general was already reviewing his notes. We made it exactly halfway down the center aisle before our path was abruptly and intentionally blocked. A woman stepped out from the third row and planted herself squarely in the middle of the red carpet. It was Aunt Gloria. She was my mother Beatrice's older sister. Gloria was a woman whose entire personality was built around gatekeeping social circles she barely belonged in. She was dripping in excessive gaudy wealth. She wore a bright crimson suit that was far too loud for a solemn military ceremony. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, catching the camera flashes and throwing aggressive sparks of light across the aisle. She was clutching the arm of a bewildered-looking naval officer. She had clearly used him as a +1, simply to gain access to an event she had no business attending. Gloria always found a way to insert herself into high-profile situations. She fed off the proximity to power like a parasite. When she saw me, her heavily powdered face twisted into a sharp, predatory smile. She looked me up and down. Her eyes lingered mockingly on my stiff, injured leg before shifting her disdainful gaze to Josephine. The temperature in the aisle seemed to drop 10 degrees as Gloria crossed her arms over her chest. She effectively formed a human barricade between us and the VIP section. "Well, look who finally decided to show up and play the hero," Gloria announced. Her voice was not hushed. It was deliberately projected. She engineered her tone to carry over the ambient noise of the auditorium and reach the ears of the journalists standing just a few feet away. I stopped walking and forced Josephine to stop beside me. Gloria let out a theatrical, breathy sigh and shook her head in mock pity. Victor and Beatrice are probably at home weeping right now. They sacrificed everything to raise a decent, respectable daughter, and instead they get this. A girl who limps into a room demanding applause while her own flesh and blood faces absolute ruin. I maintained my perfectly neutral expression and refused to give her the satisfaction of a visible reaction. My military bearing was a shield she could not penetrate. Josephine, however, did not have that armor. My aunt physically recoiled. Her shoulders dropped as the old, familiar weight of the family's abuse crashed down upon her. Gloria noticed the reaction immediately and zeroed in on her target. "And of course you brought the local charity case with you," Gloria sneered. She looked Josephine up and down with exaggerated disgust. She gestured wildly at Josephine's faded dress. "Did you find that outfit in a dumpster, Josephine? You look like a maid who got lost on her way to the service elevator. It is absolutely humiliating that you are wearing a VIP badge. That badge belongs to Victor. It belongs to the patriarch of this family, not some washed-up, pathetic woman who cannot even afford a proper haircut." Josephine's eyes filled with tears. She took a stumbling step backward and desperately wanted to retreat into the anonymous safety of the rear seating. "Please, Stella," Josephine whispered, her voice cracking with deep shame. "Let me just go to the back. Gloria is right. I am embarrassing you. I do not belong up there with the generals." I tightened my grip on Josephine's shoulder. My fingers pressed firmly into her collarbone to anchor her in place. "You are not going anywhere," I told Josephine, my voice low and steady. "You belong exactly where I put you." Gloria let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed terribly down the aisle. Several high-ranking officials turned their heads, their brows furrowed in confusion at the sudden disruption. The press corps, always hungry for a narrative, began to inch their boom microphones closer to our confrontation. Gloria noticed the shifting attention and eagerly seized the spotlight. She wanted a public execution, and she was determined to be the executioner. "Oh, listen to the big, brave soldier," Gloria mocked. She raised her voice even louder so the reporters could clearly hear every toxic syllable. "You act so noble in that uniform, Stella, but we all know exactly what you really are. You are a complete fraud. You left your poor parents to face total bankruptcy. Your sister is practically begging on the streets to save her fashion brand, and you refuse to sign a simple piece of paper to help her." Gloria took a step closer, and her crimson suit practically vibrated with self-righteous indignation. "Everyone here thinks you are so incredibly brave because you flew a helicopter," she shouted. She gestured dramatically toward the podium at the front of the room. "But true bravery is standing by your family. When your parents needed you yesterday, when they desperately needed your credit to secure a miserable $200,000 loan, you turned your back on them. You chose to parrot around Washington for a piece of metal instead of doing your duty as a daughter. You stole your own parents' peace of mind." Beatrice was crying her eyes out this morning because the bank is threatening to seize their assets. Caroline is facing public humiliation because you hoarded your military salary instead of investing in her future. You are a selfish, arrogant fraud, Stella. You only care about medals and applause. You do not care about blood. The surrounding crowd had gone completely silent. The low murmur of the Pentagon auditorium had vanished entirely. It was replaced by the uncomfortable, heavy tension of a public family dispute. The camera operators standing along the red carpet quickly swiveled their heavy lenses toward us. The red recording lights locked onto my face. Gloria had successfully painted a masterpiece of manipulation right in front of the national media. She had weaponized my military service. She framed my financial independence as an act of cruel abandonment against a supposedly loving, struggling family. The narrative she was loudly broadcasting to the journalists was crystal clear. I was an ungrateful child who sought public glory while leaving my generous, hardworking parents to drown in financial ruin. Josephine was trembling uncontrollably now. Her entire body shook under the weight of Gloria's public shaming. The bright lights of the television cameras reflected off the unshed tears in Josephine's eyes. She tried to reach up and unpin the gold guest of honor badge from her chest. She was fully prepared to surrender to the family's toxic hierarchy just to make the screaming stop. I reached out and caught Josephine's wrist. My grip was gentle but completely immovable. I lowered her hand back to her side and ensured the gold badge remained perfectly visible under the camera lights. I did not break eye contact with Gloria. My expression remained carved from stone. It was completely devoid of the panic or shame she was so desperately trying to provoke. Gloria wanted a frightened little girl. She wanted the teenager who used to sit silently at the dinner table while Victor and Beatrice mocked her ambitions. Instead, she was staring into the eyes of a combat veteran who had stared down heavily armed insurgents without blinking. The vast difference between us hung heavy in the air. Gloria was a woman whose power relied entirely on raising her voice and creating social embarrassment. My power was built on survival discipline and an absolute commitment to truth. The cameras continued to flash and captured every second of the standoff. The naval officer who had escorted Gloria looked thoroughly mortified. He desperately tried to tug on her crimson sleeve to pull her back to her seat, but Gloria swatted his hand away. She stood triumphant in the center of the aisle. A smug, vicious smile stretched across her heavily powdered face. She planted her designer heels firmly into the plush red carpet. She fully believed she had just destroyed my reputation on live television before the award ceremony could even officially begin. She waited for me to lower my head in shame. She waited for me to apologize, to drag Josephine to the back row, and to beg the reporters to delete their footage. She expected me to surrender to the toxic family dynamic that had dictated my entire youth. But as the blinding lights of the press cameras continued to flash across my service ribbons, I simply took a slow, deep breath and prepared to completely dismantle her entire pathetic existence right here and now in front of the entire watching world today. I kept my hand firmly on Aunt Josephine's shoulder, refusing to let her shrink away from Gloria's vicious ambush in the middle of the Pentagon aisle. In the military, you learn very quickly how to dominate a hostile space without ever raising your voice or throwing a physical punch. It is all about controlling the atmosphere and owning the ground you stand on. Gloria had expected me to retreat. She had anticipated that the blinding flashes of the press cameras and the heavy, judgmental stares of the high-ranking officials would force me into total submission. She wanted me to apologize, to cower away, and to drag Aunt Josephine back to the general admission seating where my toxic family believed she belonged. Instead, I took a deliberate, measured step forward, closing the physical distance between myself and my wealthy aunt. I stepped right into Gloria's personal bubble, forcing her to physically tilt her head back just to maintain eye contact with me. The air between us crackled with a volatile, dangerous energy. Gloria puffed out her chest, her gaudy crimson suit practically bristling with manufactured outrage. She opened her mouth, ready to launch into another theatrical monologue for the benefit of the eager journalists, pressing their microphones closer to our confrontation. She was desperate to control the narrative, to paint herself as the righteous defender of my supposedly victimized parents. She wanted to be the hero of a story she had completely fabricated to hide her own severe insecurities. Before she could utter a single syllable, I spoke. I did not yell. I did not allow even a fraction of emotional distress to bleed into my tone. I used the lethal factual precision I had honed during countless pre-flight tactical briefings in hostile territory. You are speaking quite loudly for someone with such a fascinating financial footprint, I said, my voice perfectly level, cold, and razor sharp. Gloria blinked, her heavily powdered forehead wrinkling in momentary confusion. Her mouth snapped shut, the rehearsed insults dying on her tongue. She glanced nervously at the reporters standing just a few feet away, suddenly hyper-aware of the boom microphones hovering just above our heads. She tried to recover her arrogant smirk, shifting her weight on her expensive designer heels. I have no idea what you are talking about, Stella, Gloria scoffed, though her voice lacked its previous booming confidence. She attempted to wave her diamond-clad hand dismissively in my face. You are just trying to change the subject because you know I am right. You are a terrible daughter, and you are trying to distract everyone from your own selfish behavior against Victor and Beatrice. I did not blink. I kept my eyes locked onto hers, stripping away all her pretentious armor with a single unyielding stare. My family had always relied on emotional manipulation to win arguments. They thrived on chaos, guilt trips, and loud public tantrums. But I was not playing their game anymore. I was playing with raw, undeniable data. Speaking of frauds, Gloria, I noticed some very interesting discrepancies regarding your wounded veterans charity, I whispered, though I deliberately pitched my voice just loud enough for the highly sensitive press microphones to pick up every single consonant. The color instantly began to drain from Gloria's face. The smug, predatory smile vanished, replaced by a sudden, rigid terror. The naval officer standing beside her, who had been completely silent, until now, shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing he was tethered to a sinking ship. I spent the last 3 months recovering in a military hospital. I continued, my tone conversational, yet dripping with lethal intent. And when you are stuck in a hospital bed with nothing but a laptop and a secure internet connection, you tend to do a lot of reading. I decided to look up the public tax records for your prestigious little organization, the same charity you use to host those lavish galas at the country club, the same charity you constantly brag about to your wealthy friends. Gloria swallowed hard. Her diamond necklace caught the light as her throat bobbed. Stella, this is not the time or the place, she hissed through clenched teeth, her eyes darting frantically toward the journalists, who were now leaning in their pens, hovering over their notepads. I think this is the perfect time, I replied smoothly. You wanted to make my military service a topic of public discussion, so let us discuss it. According to the federal filings I pulled, your charity has not actually donated a single cent to any wounded veterans in 3 years. A collective audible gasp rippled through the immediate crowd. Several reporters exchanged sharp, hungry glances. The narrative had just violently shifted from a petty family dispute into a major financial scandal involving a fake military charity right here in the halls of the Pentagon. It was absolute journalistic gold. Gloria opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, strangled sound emerged. Her hands, previously planted firmly on her hips, now fell limply to her sides. She began to tremble, the expensive fabric of her crimson suit vibrating with her sudden panic. However, I pressed on, stepping even closer so she could not escape my gaze. I did notice where the funds were actually going. It is fascinating how the administrative costs of your charity perfectly align with the lease payments on your brand new Mercedes. It is also quite remarkable how the catering budget for your charity galas exactly matches the deposits made to Victor and Beatrice's personal offshore accounts. It seems you and my parents have been running a very lucrative washing machine, disguised as a patriotic cause. I sent my audit of your public tax records to the Internal Revenue Service tip line yesterday morning. You are lying! Gloria stammered, her voice dropping to a frantic, breathless whisper. You cannot prove any of that. You are just a bitter, injured girl trying to ruin my reputation. I smiled. It was a terrifying, hollow smile that promised absolute destruction. I do not have to prove it to the press, Gloria. I already proved it to the authorities. I compiled every public tax record, every suspicious transaction, and every mismatched expense report into a very neat, very detailed audit. I imagine their financial investigators will be knocking on your heavily mortgaged front door by Monday morning to ask some extremely uncomfortable questions. The reaction was instantaneous and spectacular. Gloria turned completely chalk white. The heavy layers of foundation on her face suddenly looked like a death mask. Her eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror as the reality of federal tax fraud charges crashed down upon her. She had spent her entire life stepping on others to climb the social ladder, believing her fake charity made her untouchable. In less than 2 minutes, I had entirely dismantled her fraudulent existence using nothing but public records and basic math. The reporters surrounding us did not miss a single beat. A journalist from a major national network thrust a microphone directly toward Gloria's trembling face. "Ma'am, is it true that your charity is under investigation by the Internal Revenue Service? Have you been misappropriating funds meant for wounded veterans? Can you comment on the allegations regarding your vehicle lease?" Gloria let out a high-pitched, panicked squeak. She threw her hands up over her face to block the camera flashes that were now firing at her with rapid, blinding intensity. She stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the plush red carpet. The naval officer, realizing that being photographed next to a suspected charity fraudster would absolutely destroy his own military career, immediately dropped her arm and took 3 massive steps away, actively distancing himself from the radioactive fallout of her humiliation. "No comment!" Gloria shrieked, her voice cracking in absolute hysterics. "Leave me alone. This is a complete misunderstanding." She turned on her heel and practically sprinted back up the center aisle, pushing past bewildered military officials and diplomats in a desperate bid to escape the glaring lights of the press corps. The reporters immediately abandoned our section and chased after her, shouting aggressive questions about tax evasion and offshore accounts as she fled toward the heavy wooden exit doors. I stood perfectly still, watching her retreating figure until she completely disappeared from the auditorium. The heavy, oppressive tension that had suffocated the aisle evaporated, replaced by a stunned, respectful silence from the remaining guests. I had not yelled. I had not engaged in a messy, emotional brawl. I had simply deployed the truth with surgical precision, and it had been flawlessly effective. I turned back to Aunt Josephine. She was staring at me with wide, awestruck eyes. Her previous terror had entirely vanished, replaced by a profound, glowing admiration. She reached up and gently touched the gold Guest of Honor badge pinned to her faded blue dress. Stella Josephine breathed out, her voice filled with quiet amazement. "I cannot believe you just did that. She is going to be ruined. Victor and Beatrice are going to be furious when they see this on the news." "Let them be furious," I said, my voice calm and completely at peace. "They built their entire lives on lies. It is not my fault their foundation is finally crumbling." I offered my arm to Josephine. She smiled, a beautiful, genuine smile that erased years of exhaustion from her face, and linked her arm through mine. Together we walked the rest of the way down the red carpet. The high-ranking military officials seated along the aisle offered polite, approving nods as we passed, their respect for my handling of the situation clearly evident. We reached the very front row, stepping past the velvet ropes, reserving the seats for the most important guests of the day. I guided Josephine to the plush, velvet-lined chair, placed directly in the center of the VIP section. She sat down, sitting taller and prouder than I had ever seen her. I took my seat right beside her, resting my hands neatly in my lap. The throbbing in my leg had dulled to a manageable ache, overshadowed by the immense satisfaction of securing my perimeter against my family's toxic incursions. "Right on cue," a sharp, authoritative voice echoed through the auditorium's speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The live national broadcast will commence in exactly 30 seconds. The remaining guests quickly settled into their chairs. The camera operators adjusted their heavy lenses, focusing entirely on the main stage. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the hall were pulled shut, sealing us inside the prestigious venue. I looked up at the massive American flag draped behind the podium, feeling a deep, profound sense of readiness. My family had tried to sabotage this day. They had tried to humiliate me, to isolate me, and to break my spirit right before the cameras rolled. But they had failed spectacularly. I sat tall in my uniform, the gold badge gleaming brightly on Josephine's chest, right next to me. The room fell into a reverent, absolute silence. The stage lights flared brilliantly, illuminating the podium. The ceremony was about to begin, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The journey from a discarded, penniless teenager sleeping on a lumpy sofa to a decorated combat veteran sitting in the front row of the Pentagon had been brutally difficult. I had earned every single scar, every medal, and every ounce of my independence. As the military band began to play the opening notes of the national anthem, a profound sense of closure washed over me. I did not need Victor, Beatrice, or Caroline to validate my worth. I had forged my own honor in the fires of survival. Let the broadcast begin. The military band transitioned seamlessly from the national anthem into a stirring low march that echoed against the massive acoustic panels of the auditorium. The sheer scale of the room was designed to humble anyone who walked inside. Towering marble columns framed the main stage, and massive flags representing every branch of the United States Armed Forces hung perfectly motionless in the climate-controlled air. The national news cameras that had briefly swiveled to capture Gloria's frantic exit were now firmly locked onto the podium. Red recording lights glowed like steady embers, broadcasting this moment to millions of homes across the country. I sat perfectly still in my front row seat, my posture rigidly straight. Beside me, Aunt Josephine sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap. The gold Guest of Honor badge rested proudly over her heart. She looked completely different from the terrified woman who had cowered in the aisle just minutes ago. The toxic shadow of my family had been temporarily banished from this space. In its place, a profound atmosphere of reverence settled over the crowd. Hundreds of men and women in impeccably pressed dress uniforms sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces set in expressions of deep, unwavering respect. This was not a fashion launch party. This was not a country club networking event where people traded fake smiles and empty promises. This room was filled with individuals who understood the true cost of duty. They understood the sharp, coppery smell of blood on a helicopter floor and the terrifying, deafening roar of incoming artillery. Sitting among them, I felt an overwhelming sense of belonging that Victor and Beatrice had spent my entire life trying to deny me. A sudden hush fell over the room as a four-star general walked briskly onto the stage. His boots struck the wooden floorboards with a heavy, rhythmic cadence. He approached the polished wooden podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out over the audience. His eyes, weathered by decades of service, scanned the front row and rested briefly on me. He offered a singular, almost imperceptible nod of deep respect before looking down at his prepared remarks. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general began, his deep, resonant voice filling every corner of the massive auditorium. "Today we do not gather to celebrate a successful business quarter or a political victory. We gather to honor a level of selflessness that defies basic human instinct. We gather to recognize a soldier who looked at impossible odds, stared directly into the face of death, and chose to fly straight into it so that others might live." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle over the silent room. The cameras zoomed in closer on his face. 6 months ago, in a remote and highly volatile combat zone, an armored transport vehicle was struck by an improvised explosive device. The general continued his tone, shifting into a sharp tactical recounting of the events. The explosion disabled the vehicle and trapped a squad of American soldiers inside a hostile valley. Within minutes, enemy combatants surrounded the ridge. They unleashed a relentless barrage of heavy machine gun fire and rocket-propelled grenades down onto the trapped squad. The situation was catastrophic. The soldiers were pinned down, sustaining heavy casualties and entirely cut off from ground reinforcement. The general gripped the edges of the podium. His knuckles turned white under the bright stage lights. Due to the extreme intensity of the enemy fire, standard extraction protocols deemed the landing zone entirely too hot for a rescue mission. The risk of losing a helicopter and its entire crew was calculated at over 90%. The command center issued an order to hold position and wait for heavy air support to clear the ridge. But waiting meant the trapped soldiers would bleed out on the valley floor. The general looked directly at me again, and the entire audience seemed to hold its collective breath. The pilot in command of the nearest medical evacuation Black Hawk helicopter heard the distress calls over the radio. That pilot was then Captain Stella. Knowing full well the catastrophic risks, she deliberately ignored the overwhelming odds against her survival. She radioed base, confirmed her intentions, and pushed her aircraft into a steep, aggressive dive straight into the killing zone. I listened to his words, but my mind was instantly transported back to that sweltering, chaotic afternoon. I could hear the screaming turbines of my helicopter. I could feel the violent shudder of the aircraft as bullets pierced the fuselage. She brought her Black Hawk down through a curtain of tracer fire. The general described, his voice rising with intense admiration. The landing zone was little more than a narrow strip of rocky terrain, completely exposed to the enemy ridge. As she touched down, enemy rounds shattered the cockpit glass. One of those rounds sent a large piece of jagged metal shrapnel tearing directly into her right leg. A collective quiet gasp rippled through the civilian section of the audience. Josephine reached over and gently placed her warm hand over mine. I did not pull away. Despite sustaining a severe incapacitating injury, she refused to lift off, the general stated, emphasizing every syllable. She maintained complete control of a heavily damaged aircraft while under continuous concentrated enemy fire. She kept the helicopter grounded for 8 agonizing minutes while her medics rushed out to drag the wounded soldiers from the burning transport vehicle. She was bleeding heavily. Her instrument panel was flashing catastrophic failure warnings. The enemy forces were advancing rapidly, yet she stayed on the ground until every single wounded American was loaded into the back of her helicopter. Only then did she pull pitch and fly her crippled aircraft out of the valley, saving the lives of 12 critically injured men. The auditorium was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The reporters standing along the walls had lowered their notebooks, completely captivated by the raw, unfiltered reality of the story. This was the exact story Caroline had dismissed as a hobby. This was the event Beatrice had deemed unworthy of her presence because it interfered with a cocktail hour. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of her own life, above and beyond the call of duty. The general concluded, his voice echoing powerfully. Please stand for the awarding of the Silver Star. I took a deep breath, removed my hand from under Josephine's comforting grasp, and stood up. I engaged my core muscles to compensate for the weakness in my right leg, ensuring my posture remained perfectly rigid and upright. I stepped out of the front row and walked toward the short set of stairs leading to the stage. Every step sent a sharp jolt of pain up my thigh, but I did not let a single flinch register on my face. I marched up the stairs, crossed the wooden stage, and came to a stop directly in front of the 4-star general. I snapped a crisp, textbook salute. The general returned the salute with equal precision. He stepped forward holding a small velvet-lined box. He retrieved the Silver Star, a beautiful gleaming medal suspended from a red, white, and blue ribbon. He carefully pinned the heavy decoration onto the left breast of my dress uniform. He patted me firmly on the shoulder. The moment the pin clicked into place, the entire auditorium erupted. Hundreds of military officers, diplomats, and civilian guests rose to their feet simultaneously. The thunderous applause was deafening. It washed over the stage in massive, overwhelming waves. The press cameras flashed like a strobe light storm, capturing my face, the medal, and the cheering crowd. I looked out over the sea of standing people. My eyes immediately found Aunt Josephine in the front row. She was standing up, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt, and tears were streaming freely down her face. She was glowing with absolute pride. I let the applause wash over me, absorbing the immense respect radiating from the room. My parents had threatened that I would look out into the crowd and see nothing but empty seats and rejection. They had promised that my disobedience would result in total public humiliation. But as I stood on that stage decorated for valor and surrounded by a standing ovation, I realized just how incredibly small and insignificant their world truly was. Their absence was not a punishment. It was a massive, glorious relief. I was not the disgrace of the family. They were. The applause continued for a full 2 minutes. I stood there letting the reality of the moment anchor itself deep within my mind. This medal did not belong to my father, who would have undoubtedly tried to use photos of this event to secure fraudulent loans for his real estate scams. It did not belong to my mother, who would have used it as a prop to garner sympathy from her wealthy friends. It belonged to the medics who ran into the gunfire. It belonged to the soldiers who made it home. And in a very real way, it belonged to Josephine, who had given me a safe place to sleep when I was a discarded teenager with nothing but a duffel bag and a broken heart. Finally, the general raised his hands, signaling for the crowd to take their seats. The thunderous applause slowly subsided, replaced by the rustle of fabric as hundreds of guests sat back down. I prepared to execute a sharp about face and march back to my seat to conclude my portion of the ceremony. I shifted my weight, ready to step away from the center stage. But as I turned my shoulder, the general suddenly stepped forward and held up a large, commanding hand, gesturing for me to remain exactly where I was. I stopped, my boots planted firmly on the wooden floorboards, slightly confused. The protocol briefing had been very clear. Once the medal was pinned and the applause concluded, the recipient was supposed to return to the audience. I looked at the general, waiting for further instructions. He moved back to the polished mahogany podium and adjusted the microphone once more. Usually, this concludes the formal portion of our award ceremony. The general announced, his deep voice ringing out across the hushed auditorium. The journalists along the walls immediately perked up, sensing a deviation from the standard military script. However, today is an exceptional circumstance. We have a civilian guest in the audience who requested special permission from the highest levels of the Department of Defense to personally address this room. He requested this time to personally honor this hero not just as a military aviator, but as a savior to his own family. A murmur of intense curiosity rippled through the crowd. I stood perfectly still on the stage, completely caught off guard. This was not in the itinerary. I watched as a tall, imposing man in a sharp charcoal suit rose from a seat in the side section and began walking purposefully toward the stage. I watched as a tall man in a sharp charcoal suit rose from the side section and walked purposefully toward the stage. Hushed whispers swept through the crowd. I recognized him instantly. It was Alexander Cole, the American billionaire and CEO of a massive aerospace defense corporation. His company manufactured the helicopters I flew into combat. He climbed the stairs with a deliberate stride, ignoring the flashing press cameras. His intense, unwavering gaze was locked entirely on me. He approached the center of the stage, bypassing the podium, and stopped inches away. He grasped my hand in a firm handshake. His eyes, usually intimidating in business magazines, were red and shimmering with tears. He let go, stepped to the microphone, and looked out over the silent auditorium. "My name is Alexander Cole." He began, his deep voice carrying a rough, emotional edge that instantly captivated every journalist in the room. "Most of you know me as a businessman. You know me as a defense contractor. But today, I am not standing on this stage in any professional capacity. Today, I am standing here simply as a father." Cole gripped the heavy wooden podium, his knuckles turning white. "The general just told you about Captain Stella flying a crippled Black Hawk through enemy machine gun fire to rescue 12 trapped Americans. But military reports often leave out deeply personal details. They do not tell you about the 19-year-old private pinned inside the back of that burning armored transport vehicle. They do not tell you that this young private was bleeding out from a severe arterial wound, terrified and calling for his family as enemy forces closed in." A profound, heavy silence settled over the Pentagon auditorium. The national news cameras zoomed in tightly on Cole as a single tear escaped his eye and rolled down his weathered cheek. When Captain Stella landed her helicopter in that kill zone, she did not just wait for the wounded to be brought to her. Cole continued, his voice breaking openly now. "She took shrapnel to her leg, but she still unbuckled her harness, stepped out of her cockpit, and helped drag that bleeding 19-year-old boy out of the burning wreckage. She kit that kept him alive during the flight back to the medical base." That young Private Cole paused, taking a ragged, shuddering breath. "Was my only son." The room gasped. The magnitude of the revelation hit the audience like a shockwave. I felt a sudden jolt of surprise. I had treated dozens of wounded soldiers, unaware that the boy I saved was the sole heir to an aerospace empire. Cole turned away from the audience and looked directly at me. "You did not just save a soldier that day, Captain," he said, his voice trembling with absolute raw gratitude. "You saved my entire world. You saved my family's future. You gave me the greatest gift any human being could ever give another. And I know from what the general and my security team have told me that your own biological family chose to abandon you today. I know they refused to stand by your side to celebrate your survival and your heroism." He turned back to the crowd, his tone shifting to fierce anger. Any family that discards a woman of this caliber is completely devoid of honor, Cole stated, ensuring his words were broadcast to every television screen in America. But blood does not define family. Loyalty and sacrifice define a family. Because you brought my son home, I will make sure you and the people who actually love you are taken care of. Cole gestured to his legal team standing near the stage entrance. I am officially announcing the creation of the Stella Heroes Foundation, he declared. This foundation will be dedicated exclusively to providing medical care, financial support, and housing for wounded combat medics. To ensure this foundation has the resources to operate immediately, I am funding it with a $50 million endowment from my private wealth today. The auditorium erupted in gasps and frantic applause. The sheer scale of the $50 million donation was staggering. The reporters along the walls began typing frantically on their devices, instantly sending the breaking news out to their networks. A $50 million foundation named in my honor was something I could never have possibly imagined. It was a monumental victory that entirely eclipsed the petty, pathetic fashion launch Caroline was hosting back home. But Alexander Cole was not finished. He raised his hand, silencing the applause. He stepped away from the podium and walked to the very edge of the stage, looking directly down at the front row. His eyes locked onto Aunt Josephine, who was sitting perfectly still, her hands clamped over her mouth in absolute shock. Stella and I spoke before this ceremony, Cole said directly to Josephine. I asked how she found the strength to survive her injuries and push through rehabilitation. She told me the only reason she had the strength to survive was because of the woman sitting right there. She told me about an aunt who defied a toxic patriarch, opened her home to a discarded teenager, and mailed cookies to combat zones. She told me you are the woman who acted like a true mother. Josephine's eyes filled with fresh tears. She shook her head slightly, completely overwhelmed by the public recognition from a billionaire. My legal team did a little bit of research into your current living situation, Josephine Cole continued gently. We know you have been working double shifts at a local diner just to make ends meet. We know you have been renting a tiny rundown apartment for the last 15 years. That ends right now. Cole signaled his lead attorney. The man stepped forward and walked directly up to Josephine. He bowed respectfully and handed her a thick, heavy leather binder embossed with the Cole Corporation logo. Josephine took the binder with trembling hands. Inside that binder is the official notarized deed to an $8 million mansion located in an exclusive, highly secure gated community in Virginia, Cole announced to the entire nation. The property is completely paid off. The property taxes are covered for the next 50 years. It belongs entirely to you. But a house is just a building without a purpose. Since you are the woman who raised a hero, I can think of no one better to help guide my new organization. That binder also contains a formal employment contract. I am officially appointing you to the executive board of the Stella Heroes Foundation with a guaranteed lifetime salary of $500,000 a year. The auditorium descended into stunned silence. The payoff was impossible to process. An $8 million mansion and a $500,000 yearly salary handed over on live television. It was the ultimate reward for silent suffering. Victor and Beatrice had sacrificed everything for the illusion of status, and now the sister they mocked had just been handed generational wealth. Josephine opened the leather binder. Staring at the glossy deed and the crisp employment contract, she let out a loud sob and broke down in tears of absolute joy. She clutched the binder to her chest, her shoulders shaking. Press cameras flared like a lightning storm, capturing her beautiful, raw emotion. The gold badge on her dress gleamed brilliantly, a perfect symbol of poetic justice. I stood on the stage, looking down at the woman who saved my life. A fierce, triumphant warmth spread through my chest. The toxic grip of my biological family was entirely shattered. They wanted to punish me with their absence. Instead, they unknowingly cleared the stage for the one person who truly deserved it. As the crowd leaped to their feet for a standing ovation, military ushers moved in to escort us out. The formal ceremony had concluded. I walked down the stairs and helped Josephine to her feet. She pulled me into a fierce, crushing hug, her tears soaking my uniform. We walked up the red carpet together, flanked by Cole's private security team, to keep the shouting journalists at a safe distance. We entered the quiet hallway leading back to the VIP green room. The heavy wooden doors closed, muffling the chaotic roar of the press. I guided Josephine to a comfortable chair, letting her process the astronomical reality of her new life. I walked over to the locker and retrieved my cell phone. I pressed the small side button to wake the dark glass screen. The device instantly froze for a fraction of a terrifying second, completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming data. When the heavy notifications finally loaded, my screen lit up like a glowing warning beacon. The spectacular, completely devastating reality of my absolute retaliation had reached them. My phone screen displayed exactly 79 frantic missed calls from them. Victor, Beatrice, and Caroline had actively watched the entire broadcast. My phone was practically vibrating out of my palm, overwhelmed by the sheer staggering volume of incoming data. The device stuttered and froze for a few agonizing seconds as the processor struggled to handle the digital tidal wave of their sudden desperation. The heavy mahogany doors of the private green room sealed us off from the roaring chaos of the Pentagon auditorium. The sound of cameras, shutters, and cheering military officials faded into a dull, manageable hum. I stood in the center of the plush, secure staging area, staring down at the glowing screen of my device. When the screen finally stabilized, the notification banner revealed a staggering reality. I had exactly 79 missed calls. They were split almost evenly among my father, my mother, and my sister. The people who had coldly discarded me just a few hours ago were now relentlessly hammering my phone line, desperate to reel me back into their toxic orbit. But the missed calls were only the beginning. My inbox was clogged with dozens of frantic, wildly contradictory text messages that perfectly encapsulated their profound mental unraveling. I scrolled down the list, my expression completely blank, though a deep, cold satisfaction began to spread through my chest. The very first message, time-stamped right after the general finished his speech about my rescue mission, was from Victor. It read, "Stella, we are so incredibly proud of you. We were watching the television broadcast. You are a true American hero. Call me the second you get this. We need to celebrate as a family." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. 2 hours ago, Victor had explicitly declared that I was the absolute disgrace of the family. He had promised that they would never stand next to me. Now that my name was being broadcast across national news networks in association with unshakable military glory, he suddenly wanted to claim his position as the proud patriarch. His hypocrisy was suffocating. But as I kept scrolling, the tone of the messages violently shifted. The timestamp on the next batch of texts aligned perfectly with Alexander Cole's $50 million announcement and his life-changing gift to Aunt Josephine. The fake syrupy pride instantly vanished, replaced by sheer unadulterated panic and venomous greed. Beatrice had sent a wall of text that practically screamed through the screen. "Stella, what is going on? Why is Josephine sitting in the front row? That VIP seat belongs to your father. You need to fix this right now. Josephine does not deserve a single dime of that money. That mansion and that board position belong to the primary family. We made a mistake this morning, but you are taking this joke way too far. Call us immediately so we can handle the legal transfer of those assets." Caroline, clearly realizing that her fraudulent fashion brand was completely eclipsed by real generational wealth, sounded completely unhinged in her messages. "Stella, you cannot let Aunt Josephine keep that house. My investors are asking questions. You have a $50 million foundation now. You have to give me at least $1 million to save my brand. We are blood. You cannot leave us with nothing while you shower a stranger with mansions. Call me back." I stared at the glowing text, shaking my head at their absolute delusion. They still believed they could manipulate me. They truly thought they could just snap their fingers, issue a half-baked apology disguised as an order, and I would instantly hand over an $8 million Virginia estate to satisfy their bottomless greed. They viewed my success not as an achievement to be celebrated, but as a financial resource they were automatically entitled to plunder. I did not reply. I did not type out a furious paragraph outlining their failures. I did not demand an apology. Engaging with them would only feed their twisted dynamic and validate their toxic behavior. Instead, I calmly tapped on Victor's contact profile, scrolled to the very bottom of the screen, and pressed block caller. I repeated the exact same process for Beatrice. I did it a third time for Caroline. In less than 30 seconds, I permanently severed their digital access to my life. They were entirely cut off from the wealth and prestige they so desperately wanted to claim. I slipped the phone back into my uniform pocket and turned my attention to Aunt Josephine. She was sitting on a plush velvet sofa in the corner of the green room. The leather binder containing her new employment contract and the deed to her mansion was clutched tightly against her chest. She looked completely shell-shocked, her eyes wide and dazed as she tried to process the astronomical reality of her new existence. Stella, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she traced the embossed logo on the leather binder. This cannot be real. This has to be a mistake. Mr. Cole handed me a house. An $8 million house. I do not even know how to maintain a property like that. I am just a diner waitress. Victor is going to be absolutely furious. He is going to say I stole this from him. I walked over and knelt down in front of the sofa, so I was perfectly eye level with her. I gently placed my hands over hers, steadying her shaking fingers. Listen to me, Aunt Josephine, I said, my voice projecting a calm, unwavering authority. This is not a mistake. This is real, and you earned every single piece of it. Alexander Cole is a billionaire who values loyalty and integrity above everything else. He saw what you did for me when the rest of the world turned their backs. He is rewarding your character. Do not you dare let the ghost of my father make you feel unworthy of this gift. Victor has absolutely no power here. He cannot touch your assets and he cannot touch you. Josephine swallowed hard, a fresh wave of tears welling in her kind, tired eyes. But what if they try to take it away? You know how Beatrice gets when there is money on the line. She will hire lawyers. She will ruin my life just to get her hands on this deed. I smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that promised absolute protection. Let them try, I replied smoothly. Mr. Cole has an entire army of corporate lawyers on retainer. The deed is ironclad and the foundation board position is legally binding. Victor and Beatrice can scream until their lungs give out, but they will never see a single cent. I just blocked all of their phone numbers, and I highly suggest you do the same. We are leaving them in the rearview mirror exactly where they belong. Josephine let out a shaky, relieved breath. She nodded slowly, the profound realization of her safety finally beginning to settle over her. She pulled a tissue from her small handbag and dabbed at her eyes, sitting up a little taller. Okay, she said, her voice growing stronger. Okay, I will block them. I am done being afraid of my brother. Right on cue, a sharp, polite knock echoed against the heavy wooden doors of the green room. The door swung open, and the lead security director for the Cole Corporation stepped inside. He was a large, broad-shouldered man wearing a dark tailored suit and a discreet earpiece. He offered a respectful professional nod. Captain Ms. Josephine, the security director, said, his tone entirely deferential. Mr. Cole has requested that we escort you to your vehicle. The press corps is gathering near the main exit, but we have secured a private route through the underground loading bay. Your transportation is waiting. We will be taking you directly to the restaurant in Washington, D.C. for the private gala dinner. Thank you, I replied, standing up and helping Josephine to her feet. We are ready to go. We followed the security director out of the green room and down a series of quiet, restricted access corridors deep within the Pentagon. We entirely bypassed the chaotic media circus that was undoubtedly waiting by the front doors. I could only imagine the reporters swarming the exits, desperate to get a quote from the hero of the hour or to ambush Aunt Gloria regarding her exposed tax fraud. I had zero interest in giving any interviews. My actions on the stage had spoken loudly enough, and the consequences were already unfolding exactly as I had planned. We emerged into the cool, climate-controlled air of the underground parking garage. A massive, sleek, black armored SUV was idling near the secure exit. Two heavily armed bodyguards stood by the doors, scanning the perimeter with professional vigilance. One of the guards stepped forward and opened the heavy reinforced rear door for us. I guided Josephine into the spacious leather-lined cabin of the SUV. I climbed in right after her and settled into the plush seat. The doors closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing us inside a fortress of absolute safety and luxury. The tinted windows ensured total privacy from the outside world. The security director climbed into the front passenger seat and nodded to the driver. We are clear to proceed, he ordered, set course for the gala. The heavy vehicle accelerated smoothly out of the parking garage and merged onto the highway leading toward the heart of the Capitol. I looked out the tinted window, watching the iconic monuments of Washington, D.C. roll past against the evening sky. My mind was completely clear. I had successfully executed my counterstrike. I had secured my legacy, protected the only woman who had ever shown me true maternal love, and entirely humiliated the toxic relatives who thought they could break my spirit. We were heading to a five-star gala dinner to celebrate my medal and the launch of a $50 million foundation. We were heading toward fine dining, respectful company, and a brilliant, unburdened future. I leaned back into the soft leather seat and closed my eyes, savoring the profound silence of my phone. Victor, Beatrice, and Caroline were currently drowning in their own manufactured panic, completely locked out of my universe. I knew they would not accept their banishment quietly. I knew their insatiable greed would drive them to do something desperate and reckless. But as the armored SUV carried us toward the elite celebration, I felt a deep, unwavering certainty. Whenever they decided to show their faces, I would be ready to finish the war they had started. The armored SUV glided to a smooth halt in front of a stunning five-star restaurant in the heart of Washington. Valets rushed forward to open our doors, their posture impeccable. Alexander Cole had spared absolutely no expense for this evening. The maitre d' greeted us by name and escorted us through the main dining room, which hummed with the quiet, sophisticated chatter of diplomats and executives. We were led to an exclusive private dining suite at the back of the restaurant. The room was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over a massive oak table set with fine china and heavy silver flatware. Josephine took a seat, still clutching the leather binder to her chest like a shield. I sat across from her, finally allowing the tension in my wounded leg to release. Before the waiter could even pour our sparkling water, the heavy oak doors to our private suite swung open. I immediately braced myself for an attack, but the man who stepped inside made my shoulders instantly drop with relief. It was Jamal. My 34-year-old brother-in-law looked completely out of breath. He was still wearing his impeccably tailored charcoal suit from Caroline's fashion launch, but his tie was loosened and his brow was lined with exhaustion. As a highly respected Black African-American trauma surgeon, Jamal commanded respect the second he walked into any room. He possessed a quiet, steady strength that always felt entirely out of place in my family's chaotic orbit. Jamal closed the door behind him and let out a long, heavy exhale. "Stella," he said, walking straight toward me. He did not hesitate or offer empty pleasantries. He wrapped me in a firm, genuine hug. I watched the live broadcast on my phone the second I stepped out of the ballroom. I left the party immediately and drove straight down here. I am so incredibly sorry I was not in that audience today. You earned that silver star, and you deserve to have family standing right there with you. I hugged him back, feeling a rare surge of authentic gratitude. "You are here now, Jamal," I replied, gesturing for him to take the seat next to me. "That is what actually matters. Thank you for making the drive." Jamal took his seat, offering a warm, respectful nod to Aunt Josephine. He looked at the leather binder in her hands, his intelligent eyes registering the monumental shift in power that had just occurred on national television. "I saw Mr. Cole hand you that portfolio," Josephine. Jamal said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "Congratulations. Nobody deserves a blessing like that more than you do. You have a heart of gold, and I know you will do amazing things on the board of that foundation." Josephine blushed deeply, her hands fluttering over the leather cover. "Thank you, Jamal," she whispered, her voice still trembling with residual shock. "I still cannot wrap my mind around it. It feels like I'm going to wake up back in my tiny apartment any minute now." "You are never going back to that apartment," I stated firmly. I picked up my menu, determined to enjoy the evening. "We are going to celebrate. We are going to order the most expensive steak on this menu, and we are going to toast to the future." For the next hour, we actually experienced a taste of normal, healthy family dynamics. The waiters brought out courses of incredibly rich, masterfully prepared food. We talked about my recovery, Jamal's recent surgical victories at the hospital, and the incredible plans for the new veteran foundation. For a brief, shining window of time, the toxic shadow of Victor, Beatrice, and Caroline was completely banished. Jamal shared stories from the emergency room, his deep passion for saving lives, mirroring my own commitment to the medevac missions. We laughed, we ate, and we basked in the safety of the private room. But Jamal was highly perceptive. As the dessert plates were being cleared away, his expression grew serious. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished oak table. "Stella," he began cautiously, "I need to ask you something." Caroline was absolutely frantic when I left the launch party. She was screaming into her phone about your $50 million foundation. She told me she desperately needed a $200,000 loan from you to secure manufacturing lines. But she also told me last week that her brand was generating record profits. Why is she suddenly acting like she is facing total bankruptcy? Before I could formulate an answer that would systematically destroy his entire marriage, a loud, violent commotion erupted in the hallway outside our private suite. The sound of a heated argument shattered the sophisticated peace of the restaurant. I heard the maitre d' issuing a sharp professional warning, followed by a loud, familiar voice shrieking about VIP access and family rights. My spine instantly locked into a rigid defensive posture. Jamal frowned and turned toward the entrance. Josephine gasped, clutching her leather binder so tightly her knuckles turned white. The heavy oak doors to our private dining room burst open with explosive force. They slammed against the wall, rattling the crystal glasses on our table. The maitre d' stumbled backward, visibly distressed, as three people forcefully pushed past him and invaded our sanctuary. It was Victor, Beatrice, and Caroline. They looked absolutely deranged. They had clearly sped across state lines the absolute second the Pentagon broadcast concluded. Their usually flawless, meticulously curated appearances were entirely wrecked. Victor's expensive suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie askew, and his face was flushed a deep, unhealthy crimson from the adrenaline of his own greed. Beatrice looked like a frantic bird of prey. Her hair was windblown and her eyes were darting frantically around the luxurious room, calculating the immense wealth she was suddenly desperate to claim. Caroline looked the worst of all. She had abandoned her own fashion launch party. Her designer dress was crumpled, and her makeup was slightly smeared, giving her the manic appearance of a woman watching her fake empire burn to the ground. Despite their disheveled, chaotic state, they all simultaneously forced wide, manic, completely fake smiles onto their faces. It was a terrifying display of psychological manipulation. They were attempting to instantly rewrite history, pretending that the brutal phone call from a few hours ago had never happened. Victor strode forward, throwing his arms wide open in a grand theatrical gesture of paternal love. "Stella, my hero daughter," he bellowed, his voice booming artificially through the private room. We rushed here as fast as we possibly could. The traffic on the interstate was an absolute nightmare, but nothing was going to stop us from celebrating with our favorite girl. We watched the broadcast. "We are so incredibly proud of you." I did not stand up. I did not smile. I remained seated, my hands resting calmly on the table. The sheer audacity of his lie was physically repulsive. "You did not rush here to celebrate, Dad," I replied, my voice dropping to a freezing absolute zero. "You rushed here because you smelled blood in the water, and you realized you just missed the biggest payday of your pathetic life. You told me you would never stand next to me. You called me the disgrace of the family. Those were your exact words." Victor's fake smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly plastered it back on. "Oh, Stella, do not be so dramatic." He chuckled nervously, waving his hand as if swatting away a minor annoyance. "You know I have a temper. We all say things we do not mean when we are stressed about business. But that is all in the past now. We are family. Family forgives. Family shares in the victories." He stepped closer to the table, his eyes locking hungrily onto me. "Mr. Cole gave you a $50 million foundation. That is incredible, sweetheart. With my real estate background, I can manage the property investments for the foundation. We can keep all the administrative salaries right here in the family." His delusion was breathtaking. He actually believed he could walk into this room, ignore years of abuse, and instantly appoint himself the financial manager of my military charity. Before I could tear his delusion to shreds, Beatrice stepped around him. She completely ignored me and locked her predatory gaze directly onto Aunt Josephine. Beatrice marched up to the table, her eyes practically vibrating with toxic entitlement. She pointed a sharp manicured finger directly at the leather binder in Josephine's arms. "Give Victor the deed," Josephine Beatrice demanded, her voice losing all traces of fake warmth. She sounded like a dictator issuing a non-negotiable command. "Hand over the paperwork right now. You and I both know you were just a stand-in today. Stella only put you in that front row seat because her father was temporarily unavailable. That $8 million house belongs to the patriarch of this family. It is Victor's property by right." Josephine shrank back into her chair, her eyes wide with familiar terror. She clutched the binder tighter instinctively, trying to protect her lifeline from the woman who had tormented her for decades. "Beatrice, please," Josephine stammered. "Mr. Cole handed this to me. He said it was a reward for taking Stella in." "You only took her in because you had nothing better to do with your miserable life," Beatrice snarled, slamming her hand down on the oak table. "You are a waitress, Josephine. You do not know how to manage an $8 million estate. You do not belong in a gated community in Virginia. You will embarrass the family. Hand over the deed to Victor, and we will graciously give you a small allowance to upgrade your horrible little apartment." "Do not you dare speak to her that way," I commanded, my voice slicing through the room like a combat knife. I pushed my chair back and stood up, my full height dominating the space. My military uniform commanded an authority that Beatrice's designer clothes could never match. "You take one more step toward my aunt, and I will have security drag you out of this building by your hair." Beatrice sneered, refusing to back down. "You have no right to threaten your mother, Stella. We are taking what rightfully belongs to this family." Before my fingers could firmly grasp the cold metal of the encrypted drive I had brought, Caroline suddenly dropped to the floor. The heavy thud of her knees hitting the expensive hardwood resonated through the private dining room. She did not just kneel, she collapsed in a highly calculated theatrical display of absolute despair. Her designer gown pooled awkwardly around her legs. She reached out and desperately grabbed the hem of my military dress jacket. Her manicured fingers dug into the dark green fabric like a drowning woman clinging to a life raft. "Stella, please!" Caroline wailed, her voice echoing shrilly against the crystal chandeliers above us. "You have to listen to me. I am begging you. You have $50 million sitting in an account right now. You are practically royalty in Washington. You can easily give me $1 million to save my brand. It is practically pocket change to you now. We are blood. We are sisters. You owe me this." I stared down at her, feeling absolutely nothing but profound disgust. She had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable stepping stone. Just 3 hours ago, she had openly mocked my silver star, calling the physical manifestation of my spilled blood a piece of scrap metal. Now she was sobbing at my boots, completely stripped of her artificial superiority. "Get your hands off my uniform," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous, freezing tone. I took a deliberate step backward, forcing her fingers to slip off the fabric. "You abandoned your own launch party to come here and beg for charity. You humiliated yourself in front of your own investors, Caroline. And now you are humiliating yourself in front of me. I do not owe you a single cent." Caroline let out a loud, dramatic sob, throwing her hands over her face to simulate uncontrollable crying. "I am going to lose everything," she shrieked, entirely ignoring my warning. "The manufacturers are threatening to seize my assets. The bank is going to foreclose on the storefront. If I do not wire them $1 million by Monday morning, I am completely ruined. You cannot let this happen to me. You have the money. You have to save me." Jamal stood frozen near the head of the oak table. As a highly trained trauma surgeon, Jamal was accustomed to operating in environments of extreme bloody chaos. He spent 80 hours a week making split-second decisions to save lives. He was a man built on logic, precision, and absolute integrity. Watching his wife writhe on the floor of a five-star restaurant screaming about impending bankruptcy caused a violent collision of facts inside his brilliant mind. Jamal looked from the sobbing mess of his wife on the floor to the pale, panicked faces of Victor and Beatrice. The deep, warm affection that usually resided in his eyes was rapidly evaporating. It was being replaced by a cold, clinical, and intensely sharp anger. "Caroline," Jamal said, his deep voice carrying a terrifying, quiet weight that immediately silenced her theatrical sobbing. "What exactly are you talking about?" Save your brand. You told me the company was generating record profits. You told me the $200,000 loan you needed from Stella was just a basic formality for a minor overseas expansion. Why are you screaming about investors walking out and facing total bankruptcy? The entire room went completely rigid. The chaotic, greedy energy my family had violently dragged into the private suite hit a massive, impenetrable brick wall. Caroline looked up at her husband, the remaining color entirely draining from her face. She had been so completely blinded by the flashing dollar signs of my newly announced foundation that she failed to realize her own massive web of lies was currently detonating right in front of the man she had been deceiving for years. Jamal, honey. Caroline stammered, her voice suddenly losing its shrill volume. She scrambled to her feet, her high heels scraping clumsily against the floorboards. It is just a temporary cash flow problem. The markets are volatile right now. You know how business works. I just need a tiny bridge loan from my sister to keep the supply chain moving. Do not lie to me, Jamal fired back, taking a dominant, imposing step toward her. His broad shoulders squared as he stared her down. You do not beg for $1 million on your knees to fix a temporary cash flow problem. You just said the manufacturers are threatening to seize your assets. You just said the bank is foreclosing on your storefront. I look at our joint financial statements every month, Caroline. Everything you showed me indicated we were heavily in the black. Have you been forging the bank documents you show me? Victor quickly stepped between them, raising his hands in a pathetic attempt to play the role of the calming patriarch. Now, Jamal, let us all just take a deep breath. Victor chuckled nervously, his face slick with anxious sweat. Business is a complicated beast. Caroline is just exaggerating because she is emotional. You know how women in our family can get when they are stressed. We are just experiencing a minor liquidity bump. Jamal slowly turned his head to look at Victor. The surgeon did not blink. Do not patronize me, Victor, Jamal warned, his voice low and dangerous. And do not ever use my wife's gender to excuse financial fraud in my presence. I am a surgeon, not a fool. I know what a dying patient looks like, and right now I am looking at a dying family. Beatrice, realizing that her golden child's marriage and financial shield were rapidly disintegrating, immediately swooped in to run damage control. She plastered on her most condescending maternal smile and reached out to pat Jamal's arm. Jamal, dear, you are overreacting. Beatrice cooed, her voice dripping with toxic manipulative sweetness. You work so hard at the hospital saving lives. We simply did not want to burden your brilliant mind with the tedious, boring logistics of retail manufacturing. Victor and I have it all completely under control. We are just asking Stella to do her basic duty as a sister and share the wealth she stumbled into today. Once she writes the check, everything will go back to normal. Jamal looked down at Beatrice's hand resting on his arm. He stared at it with such profound disgust that Beatrice actually flinched and pulled her hand back as if she had been burned. You lied to me, Jamal stated, his voice ringing with absolute horrifying clarity. All of you lied to me. You sat at my dinner table, you drank wine paid for by my surgical salary, and you looked me straight in the eye while you pretended to be a dynasty. You used my name and my status to prop up your social standing in this city, and all the while you were drowning in debt. Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, but Jamal cut her off instantly. Be quiet, Beatrice, he commanded, his voice echoing fiercely against the crystal chandeliers. I am done listening to your manufactured reality. He turned back to Caroline, who was now visibly trembling, her hands clasped tightly together in a desperate posture of submission. How deep are you in, Caroline? Jamal demanded, his tone entirely clinical now. Tell me the exact number. How much debt are you hiding from me? Caroline opened her mouth, a pathetic whimpering sound escaping her throat. It is not that bad, Jamal, I promise. If Stella just gives me the money from her foundation, I can fix everything. Nobody has to know. Jamal shook his head slowly, a look of profound heartbreak and utter betrayal washing over his features. You really have no idea who I am, do you? He whispered, the sheer disappointment in his voice cutting deeper than any shouted insult. You actually think I would allow you to steal money from a foundation dedicated to wounded combat veterans just to cover up your own catastrophic failures? You think I would stand by and watch you extort your sister after she took shrapnel for this country? Jamal took a deliberate step away from Caroline, effectively drawing a physical boundary between himself and the toxic rot of my family. He turned his back on his wife, his father-in-law, and his mother-in-law. He looked directly at me. His eyes were completely clear, stripped of the illusions they had fed him since the day he married into this nightmare. Stella, Jamal said, his voice returning to a steady, respectful cadence. When I was out in the hallway earlier before they barged in, you told me they tried to force you to co-sign a loan. You said they wanted to use your credit. I nodded slowly, maintaining intense eye contact with the only decent man in the room. That is correct, Jamal, I replied evenly. They ambushed me yesterday. They told me if I did not put my name on their debt, I would be entirely banished from the family. They followed through on that threat this morning when they boycotted my Silver Star ceremony. Jamal crossed his arms over his chest. His brilliant analytical mind was rapidly putting the final devastating pieces of the puzzle together. If they were desperate enough to try and extort a military pilot for a $200,000 loan, he deduced aloud, analyzing the situation with ruthless logic, then Caroline's brand is not just failing, it is a completely hollow shell, which means they have been securing their previous lines of credit using an entirely different asset. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the private dining suite. Victor let out a strangled, panicked gasp. Beatrice clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes darting frantically toward the exit doors, as if contemplating a desperate escape. Caroline began to weep again, but this time there was absolutely no theatricality to her tears. It was the raw, visceral panic of a cornered animal realizing the trap had finally snapped shut. I reached my hand back into the pocket of my dark green military dress jacket. The cold, heavy metal of the encrypted USB drive sat perfectly against my fingertips. I had spent the entire afternoon holding on to this specific weapon, waiting for the precise, perfect moment to detonate it. My family thought they could march into my celebration and demand $1 million. They had no idea they had just walked directly onto an active minefield. You are a very smart man, Jamal, I said calmly, pulling my hand out of my pocket. I brought the encrypted drive up, holding it between my fingers so the metallic casing caught the warm light of the chandelier. And unfortunately for you, your medical diagnosis is absolutely correct. The disease in this family runs much deeper than a failing clothing brand. I stepped forward and placed the drive flat onto the center of the polished oak dining table. It landed with a soft, definitive click. The ultimate reckoning had finally arrived today. The ultimate reckoning had finally arrived today. I sat back in my plush dining chair and let the profound weight of the moment settle over the room. The frantic, greedy energy that my parents and sister had brought into the private suite was completely gone, replaced by a suffocating, terrified silence. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, letting them stew in their own mounting panic. I reached into the breast pocket of my dark green military dress jacket. My fingers closed around the cold, solid metal of a small encrypted USB drive. I pulled it out and held it up. The crystal chandeliers above us cast a sharp reflection across the silver casing of the drive. Every single eye in the room tracked my movement. Victor swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously above his wrinkled collar. Beatrice clutched her pearl necklace so tightly, her knuckles turned entirely white. Caroline remained frozen on the floor, her fake tears drying up as genuine dread began to take hold. I lowered my hand and dropped the small silver drive directly onto the center of the polished oak dining table. It landed with a sharp, definitive clatter that made my mother physically jump. "What is that?" Victor demanded, his voice cracking slightly. He tried to force a dismissive chuckle, but it sounded completely hollow. "Is this some kind of military presentation you want to show us, Stella? We are not interested in your combat footage right now. We are talking about family business." "This is family business, Dad," I replied smoothly, my voice projecting a calm, lethal authority. "And it is far more interesting than any combat footage. You see, when a billionaire defense contractor decides to hand over a $50 million endowment to establish a foundation in your name, the government does not just write a check and look the other way. The Department of Defense and federal financial auditors get heavily involved. They demand absolute transparency. They ran an intense, microscopic background check on me to ensure I was a suitable candidate for this level of public funding and responsibility." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. I locked my eyes directly onto my father. They did not just look at my military service records, they executed a comprehensive audit of my entire immediate family. They combed through every single financial footprint attached to the people who share my last name. They wanted to make absolutely certain that there were no outstanding liabilities, no hidden debts, and no criminal vulnerabilities that could embarrass the Foundation or the military. Beatrice let out a high-pitched, nervous gasp. "You let federal agents look into our private accounts. You have absolutely no right to invade our privacy like that, Stella. We are upstanding citizens." "You are not upstanding citizens, Beatrice," I countered coldly. "You are incredibly sloppy criminals, and I did not have to grant the federal auditors permission to look at anything. Your financial records were already bleeding red flags all over the public banking sector." It took their forensic accountants less than 3 hours to completely unravel the pathetic, fraudulent illusion you have all been living in. I turned my gaze to my sister, who was still kneeling on the hardwood floor. "Let us talk about your luxury fashion brand, Caroline. The brand you claim is generating record profits. The brand you begged Jamal to support. The auditors pulled your supply chain invoices and your retail distribution logs. Do you want to tell your husband the truth, or should I do it for you?" Caroline opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked up at Jamal, her eyes wide with absolute naked terror. Jamal stood completely still, his broad shoulders squared, his jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Tell me the truth right now, Caroline," Jamal ordered, his deep voice vibrating with a quiet, dangerous fury. "Since my sister seems to have lost her voice, I will explain it," I said, leaning back into my chair. "Your luxury brand has never manufactured a single piece of original clothing, Caroline. You have zero retail distribution. You have no actual investors. The company is a complete and total phantom. It is a fraudulent shell company created for one specific purpose." Jamal frowned, his brilliant analytical mind racing to process the catastrophic revelation. "If the company sells no products and has no investors, how does it show a profit on the joint financial statements she gave me? Where is the money coming from?" "The money is coming from Victor," I answered, shifting my gaze back to my father, who was now sweating profusely. His face had turned a sickly shade of gray. "You see, Jamal, my father is not a retired, successful real estate broker. He is a desperate man running a series of illegal underwater real estate scams. He has been buying up condemned, worthless commercial properties under fake corporate names, artificially inflating their value, and then securing massive loans against them. But to make that dirty money look clean, he needed a washing machine. He needed a legitimate-looking business that could report high cash revenues without raising suspicion." I pointed to the encrypted USB drive resting on the oak table. "That silver drive contains the complete mapping of your entire money laundering operation. Victor funnels the illicit real estate loans directly into Caroline's fake fashion brand. Caroline then reports that dirty cash as legitimate clothing sales, pays the minimum corporate taxes to maintain the illusion, and funnels the clean money right back to Victor and Beatrice so they can pay their country club dues and lease their luxury cars. You three have been running a textbook federal fraud ring right under the nose of a trauma surgeon who spends 80 hours a week saving lives." The private dining room fell into a horrifying, suffocating silence. The ambient noise of the restaurant outside seemed to vanish entirely. Aunt Josephine sat completely frozen next to me, her eyes darting between my parents and the silver drive on the table. She clutched her leather binder tightly, finally realizing the absolute magnitude of the bullet she had dodged by being estranged from her brother. Victor tried to stand up, his hands shaking violently as he gripped the edge of the table. "Stella, you are deeply confused," he stammered, his voice rising in panic. "You do not understand high-level corporate finance. This is just creative accounting. Every major business uses these tax strategies. It is perfectly legal. If you just give us the drive, we can explain the ledgers to you." "Creative accounting does not result in death threats from aggressive creditors." "Dad," I replied, my voice dropping to a freezing absolute zero. "The federal auditors noticed a very severe disruption in your cash flow over the last 3 weeks. Your real estate scams finally collapsed. The bank stopped lending you money, which means the washing machine stopped running. You suddenly found yourselves owing a massive amount of cash to some very dangerous, unregulated private lenders. I looked down at Caroline, ensuring my words hit her with maximum impact. That is the real reason you ambushed me yesterday for a $200,000 loan signature. It had absolutely nothing to do with securing manufacturing lines for your fake clothes. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to pay off aggressive creditors who were threatening to take your entire operation straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You wanted me to risk my military career and my flawless credit score to bail you out of a federal crime. Beatrice let out a loud, dramatic wail and buried her face in her hands. Victor collapsed backward into his dining chair, his chest heaving as he struggled to breathe. The grandiose, arrogant facade they had maintained for decades was completely obliterated. They had walked into this restaurant expecting to bully me into handing over $1 million. Instead, they had walked directly into a heavily fortified trap, and the blast doors had just firmly locked behind them. Jamal stepped forward. The profound betrayal radiating from him was palpable. He looked down at his wife, who was still kneeling on the floor, weeping into her hands. You lied to me about everything, Jamal said, his voice stripped of all its previous warmth. You used our marriage to cover up a federal crime ring. I am so sorry, Jamal, Caroline sobbed hysterically, reaching for his pant leg. I did not want to involve you. My dad said he had it all under control. We just needed a little more time to balance the books. I love you. Please, you have to believe me. Jamal stepped out of her reach, his face carved from absolute stone. I did not bring you the worst part yet, Jamal, I said softly, drawing his attention back to me. The money laundering is just the mechanics of their crime. The true betrayal is how they secured the initial loans when Victor's credit completely failed. They needed a pristine, highly respected financial profile to act as the ultimate guarantor for their shadow accounts. I reached into my pocket one last time and pulled out a single folded piece of official government paper. I placed it gently on the table next to the USB drive. I am so deeply sorry to be the one to tell you this, Jamal. I truly am. But you need to look at this document right now. The fallout of their greed is about to hit you directly. Jamal slowly reached across the polished oak table. His large, steady hands picked up the folded document. As he unfolded the crisp paper, the tension in the room reached a breaking point. The final pillar of their fraudulent empire was about to collapse, and my sister was about to lose the only good thing she had ever managed to secure in her entirely fabricated life. The ultimate punishment was finally underway. Jamal picked up the document. He unfolded the paper, scanning paragraphs of legalese. I watched his brilliant mind process the truth. The summary by federal auditors detailed how Victor and Caroline secured massive shadow loans after Victor's credit collapsed. They needed a pristine financial profile to act as guarantor. Jamal read the highlighted sections. His broad shoulders went rigid. I saw the exact second his heart broke, followed by the terrifying ignition of clinical rage. His hands began to tremble, the paper shaking audibly. Victor and Caroline had secretly used Jamal's medical license, his flawless credit score, and his substantial surgical income as collateral for their illegal real estate scams. They forged his signature on dozens of loan applications, tying his entire professional existence to their federal crimes, completely without his knowledge. Jamal lowered the document to the oak table. He looked down at his wife. Caroline was kneeling, her designer dress pooling. Trembling violently, her face drained of color, she looked up at him with animalistic panic. She opened her mouth, stuttering out disjointed excuses. Jamal, please, Caroline choked out. Dad said it was safe. He promised me your name would never be attached to public filings. We were going to pay it all back before you found out. I swear I never wanted to put your career at risk. I did it for our future. You forged my signature to fund a criminal enterprise. Jamal stated, his voice devoid of warmth. You risked my medical license. You risked everything I spent my life building. I trusted you with my livelihood, and you used me as a human shield for your father's dirty money. Jamal did not yell. His freezing calm was more terrifying than any shouted insult. He reached over and grasped the gold wedding band. With a deliberate twist, he pulled the ring off. He held it suspended over Caroline's half-empty wine glass for an agonizing second. Then he simply let it drop. The heavy gold band hit the bottom of the crystal glass with a sharp clink, splashing red wine up the sides. I work 80 hours a week saving lives, Jamal said. And you used my name to commit federal fraud. I am calling my lawyers, And then I am calling the authorities. We are done, Caroline. Do not ever contact me again. He turned away from her sobbing form and looked directly at me. The betrayal he felt was immense, but so was his integrity. He offered me a nod of deep respect. "Thank you for telling me the truth, Stella," he said quietly. "I wish you the absolute best." Jamal turned on his heel and walked straight out of the private dining suite, the heavy oak doors closing behind him. He left Caroline screaming in terror on the floor, her fabricated life entirely obliterated. Stripped of their lies, facing imminent federal prison, Victor and Beatrice shattered. Beatrice dropped to her knees next to Caroline. Victor stumbled forward, his legs giving out as he collapsed onto the hardwood floor. They crawled toward me, their faces contorted in panic. "Stella, please," Victor begged, tears streaming. "You have to help us. You have billionaire connections now. Mr. Cole can hire the best defense attorneys. You can make this go away. We are your blood. You cannot let us go to federal jail. We will lose everything." Beatrice reached out, her shaking hands hovering inches from my combat boots. "Please, Stella," she sobbed, stripped of her toxic pride. "I will apologize for everything. Just give us the money to pay them off. Do not let them take us away." I looked down at the three of them. I felt no pity. I leaned forward and looked directly into Victor's tear-filled eyes. I let the silence stretch for a moment, making sure he felt the crushing weight of his actions. "I will never stand next to you," I said, repeating the exact words he had hurled at me over the phone earlier that afternoon. My voice was calm, powerful, and utterly final. "You are the disgrace of this family." I stood up straight and gave a definitive nod to the restaurant security detail and Alexander Cole's private bodyguards. They moved forward immediately with professional efficiency. They grabbed Victor, Beatrice, and Caroline by their arms, hauling them roughly to their feet. My parents and sister sobbed and thrashed, screaming my name in humiliation as the security team dragged them out of the restaurant and into the cold Washington night. 3 months later, the morning air was crisp and clear. I sat comfortably on the expansive balcony of the $8 million Virginia mansion, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. Aunt Josephine sat in the plush wicker chair beside me, reviewing documents for the Stella Heroes Foundation. Inside the massive sunlit living room, the television played the morning news. The anchor announced the formal federal indictment of Victor and Caroline, detailing their extensive real estate fraud and money laundering operations. They were facing decades behind bars, their assets completely seized by the government. Beatrice was currently living in a rundown motel, desperately trying to avoid her own accessory charges. She had spent the last 3 months hopelessly begging for a lawyer, but nobody in their right mind would ever agree to take her failing case. The doorbell chimed softly through the estate. A moment later, Jamal walked out onto the balcony carrying a box of pastries from a local bakery. He had successfully protected his medical license and his assets, having cooperated fully with the federal authorities the moment he left the restaurant that night. We had remained good friends, bonded by our shared survival of their toxicity. I took a sip of my coffee and looked out over the vast, peaceful green acreage of the estate. I had not just survived the brutal wars overseas. I had fought the hardest battle of my life right here, and I had absolutely won the war at home. The profound journey we just witnessed from the marble halls of the Pentagon to the tense confines of a Washington dining room leaves us with one powerful, undeniable lesson. Blood dictates biology, but only actions can define a true family. For far too long, society has pushed the narrative that we must blindly forgive and accommodate our relatives simply because we share the same DNA. However, this story shatters that illusion, proving that toxic people will often use the concept of family loyalty not as a bond of love, but as a weapon of extortion. Throughout her life, Stella was treated as a disposable stepping stone. Her parents demanded her absolute obedience and even tried to force her to compromise her flawless credit to fund a fraudulent lifestyle for their golden child. When Stella established a firm boundary and refused to be financially manipulated, her family retaliated with the ultimate betrayal by boycotting her Silver Star ceremony. They expected her to crumble. They expected the crushing weight of their absence to break her spirit. Instead, their absence became the very catalyst for her liberation and ultimate reward. The pivotal lesson here is that you do not have to set yourself on fire to keep toxic relatives warm. Resilience teaches us that walking away from abusive family members is not an act of failure. It is an act of profound self-preservation. When you stop expending all your energy trying to earn the approval of people who are committed to misunderstanding you, you finally create space for those who truly value your worth. We saw this beautifully illustrated through Aunt Josephine, who offered genuine maternal love when Stella had nothing, and through Jamal, a man of immense integrity, who instantly severed ties with corruption the moment the undeniable truth was exposed. Furthermore, this narrative highlights the unmatched power of cold hard truth against emotional manipulation. Narcissistic abusers thrive in chaos, utilizing gaslighting and dramatic tantrums to control the narrative. Stella did not engage in their chaotic screaming matches. She neutralized their entire fraudulent existence using surgical precision, undeniable data, and absolute calm. She proved that when you are firmly anchored in reality and stand confidently in your own achievements, no amount of fake tears or desperate begging can pull you back into the dark. Ultimately, the family you choose will always be stronger than the family you are simply born into. You owe no loyalty to those who only view you as a resource to be exploited. By refusing to compromise her honor, Stella not only protected her legacy, but also cleared the path for authentic justice. She reminds us all that true wealth is not found in offshore accounts or fake luxury brands, but in the unwavering peace of a life built on absolute integrity. Please share your own stories of setting firm boundaries with toxic relatives, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.